Good afternoon. Welcome to the Droidcon Italy webinar. My name is Lucy James. I'm one of the organisers of Droidcon Italy. Today you'll be hearing from Rounak Bose on a design-centric approach to development. Hi, Rounak.
Hi, what's up?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We're really glad to have you here. Today, we'll be using Slido for the questions and answers at the end of Rounak's presentation. There is a link for the Slido platform that will be in the chat bar and which you might see on your screen just shortly. You can post your questions there and Rounak will answer them at the end of his presentation. Today's webinar is brought to you by Synesthesia and it is powered by Bluetooth. Rounak, it's over to you. Have a great webinar.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. So, as the title suggests, I will be talking about how a design-centric approach can, rather should be taken to make sure your product is a success. Okay, one quick suggestion before I start. You might want to keep a pen and paper handy if you want to take some notes. I will, of course, share this presentation at the end, so there's no need to screenshot every other page. Yeah, with that out of the way, let's start. So, tell me, developers don't design, right? Product managers don't design. Interviewers, focus group moderators, sales in charges, they don't design, right? See, that's where we get it wrong. This is where most of us fail to understand the true implication of what design actually is. Design is not just fancy gradients and mind-blowing typography. That is just art. Design is understanding what to do and taking decisions, coming up with how to do it. So it's a never-ending process in the life cycle of a product. And good design lies hidden. And that is what needs to be dug up so as to understand its true potential. Now, the development of a product or a service is just one stage in its life cycle that often overlaps into the other stages. So it is extremely crucial that a design-centric approach be adopted to make sure that everything created is, right from the very start, being done in the best interest of all people who could possibly be affected by your process, and of course, consequently, your product. It is extremely noteworthy that I did not use the term users. But why? So before going any further, I would like to introduce you to the term DMU, or Decision Making Unit, that really every developer and designer and product manager needs to know. So basically, the DMU has 5 main roles: the gatekeeper, the initiator, the influencer, the decider, and the user. So, the gatekeeper. You can think of this person as being responsible for the stop and go in the process, at times proactively searching for information and making recommendations, while at other times stalling the decision-making altogether. The initiator is the person that recognizes that there is a need that needs to be satisfied. There is a problem that needs to be solved. The influencer is that person who makes persuasions in the decision-making based on experience and prior knowledge. The decider, almost always also the buyer, plays the role of a negotiator before taking the final decision. And the user is the person who puts the product into operation once the deal has been made. So they are heavily involved in the post-purchase evaluation and often play really a minor role in the pre-purchase scenes. So it is vital to not only design for this user that we speak of so casually, because as it turns out, if the experience of even any one of the DMU is subpar, the chances of survival for the product decreases manifold. And this is why good design covers all phases of a product's life cycle. Now, broadly speaking, there are 5 stages of design for any product or service. based, of course, on how we move forward with turning an idea into reality. And each of these stages have some design methods that are basically tools that you can use to make informed decisions. These stages are structured in a way that the methods, when used in a proper sequence, will help you to understand and empathize with people better. And in this process, you will be able to build more meaningful products. So let's start taking a look at the 5 stages and what they actually mean. That is, what are the core processes taking place in each of them? So the first stage, phase 1, is the planning, scoping, and definition phase. This is where you understand the project parameters and you explore the broader scope of what the aim of the project might be, and you clearly define what the problem statement is. The second stage, phase 2, is for exploration, synthesis, and design implications. A common occurrence in this stage is immersive research, and coupled with design ethnography, you will arrive at the implications for design. The third stage, phase 3, is for concept generation and early prototyping. This stage involves multiple iterations of participatory and generative design activities. In the fourth stage, phase 4, we have evaluation, refinement, and production, which again is based on iterative testing and feedback from the users. And finally, the fifth stage, phase 5, is for launch and monitoring. In order to ensure readiness of your product for public use, quality assurance testing of the design is mainly carried out here, along with ongoing review and course correction if and when necessary. So these are the 5 stages that products from actual projects go through until and even after deployment. So now that we know what the stages are and what happens broadly in each of them, let's take a look at the most significant design methods from each stage. Now, this process might seem a bit more academic to you, but bear with me. You will be getting to know stuff, some of which a few of you may already know, but most of it should really be a great learning experience for all of you. So for each method, we will be looking at the potential problems that you can apply the method to, the basic steps, and what you would get as output from the method. Starting off with phase 1, we have stakeholder maps, Kano analysis, and the critical incident technique. Now, most of you have probably heard of stakeholder maps, so we'll briefly skim over it. A stakeholder is basically any person who is involved directly or indirectly with your product. They are the end users, those who will benefit from your project, even those who might be adversely affected by your project, and those who may be trying to sabotage your project. Once you have these brainstormed, you can find relationships between the product and the stakeholders and how to move forward, keeping in mind the best interest of all these people. Next, Kano analysis is an exploratory technique where you look at the set of all features of your product or service. And after thorough testing, you realize broadly which features are required and which not so much. All features are tested to determine which of the 5 classes they belong to: required, desired, excited or a delighter, neutral, and anti-feature. This classification is done based on a mapping of whether the user is satisfied or not to when the feature is present to when the feature is absent. So as you might understand, this method is used generally when a redesign is being carried out. And finally, the critical incident technique is a very useful self-reporting method that basically helps you to understand what a user would do with your product in case they are faced with an emergency or critical incident. This helps remove all anticipated reasons for anxiety once they have already been taken account for in your design. Now, you should keep in mind the cause of the incident and, of course, whether it might have been avoidable in the first place, the user actions, the sentiments involved, the expected outcome, and, of course, the ideal outcome. Because your task is then to make sure that the design helps provide the ideal outcome for all possible positive and negative incidents based on recommendations from testing with real-life users. Now, in phase 2, we will be looking at speed dating, not the one you're thinking about, scenario description swim lanes, and cognitive walkthroughs. So, speed dating. This is a generative design tool that is used to best understand the sentiments of the stakeholders with respect to multiple design options that you have made for them. In this process, for all the design concepts that you have made, you need to create storyboards. And then you essentially speed date with each of them. You realize the perks and the flaws and the trade-offs for each of the options. And you keep iterating, and finally, you arrive at the best design concept suitable for each scenario depicted in the storyboards that you earlier created. Up next, we have the scenario description swim lanes. Here, first we create a set of all possible tasks associated with your product. You then use that list of tasks to create an exhaustive set of all possible scenarios. For each scenario, you make user stories, and each user story has 3 lanes: the UX lane, the business process lane, and the tools and systems lane. The UX lane is for the user side of activities. The business process lane is for the business logic at each step to support the UX lane. And the tools and systems lane is to understand the technical requirements at each step, which again supports the UX lane and the business process lane. Now, having a thorough understanding of each of these steps would help to clarify things for all members of your team and make recommendations for improvement or even simplification of any swim lane, if and when possible, that is. One thing you might want to note with this method is that it is useful in only some cases, like for application-based products and re-engineering projects. You would ideally want to skip on this method for marketing or content-heavy projects. And we'll wrap up phase 2 with cognitive walkthroughs. This is an evaluative method and again requires that list of tasks you created earlier, remember? And you break down each task into a set of actions. And for each action, you ask yourself some few questions, like, will users want to produce whatever effect the action currently has? Will users see the control button or menu or label for that action? Will users actually recognize that the control is going to produce the effect they want? And after the action has taken place, will users understand the feedback they are getting? All these questions for each action, just to know whether your users can confidently complete each step and move on to the next, and complete each task. As a result of this activity, you should be able to get a set of all potential problem states and rectify them in your product. Moving on to phase 3, we have the Think Aloud protocol, write or rapid iterative testing and evaluation, and parallel prototyping, where you'll generate the early concepts and start iterating on prototypes. So these are 3 really very important tools. Starting off with the Think Aloud protocol. It is exactly as it sounds. So you organize a testing session with your users as participants. You give the prototype or an interactive mock-up to the participant and give them a simple task to complete. Of course, the task need not be simple per se. What I mean is that the task should be such that it can be easily performed using that interactive prototype you gave them. And while the participants are performing that task, they are required to vocalize everything that is going on inside their mind. Now, this is easier said than done. So you, or the moderator of this interview, need to be slightly nudging the users along the way to keep talking about what they are doing or looking at on the mockup, and what they feel at each stage and what they're thinking. This will help you to thoroughly understand which parts of your design are delightful, which features are confusing for your users, and which are downright frustrating. Next, write or rapid iterative testing and evaluation is again a self-reporting method that you need to use probably for almost each and every project that you work on. You see, the first thing that we design or build holds sentimental value stemming from the ownership bias. But it is also often something that could be vastly improved upon. Hence, it is important to keep our subjective evaluations out of the way and critically and objectively keep iterating. So in Write, what you need to do is for each feature of your product, you need to identify potential usability problems. Then for every problem, you iterate, evaluate, and reiterate until the problem is solved. This way, not only is reaching the final prototype seem less of a challenge, but also will get rid of minor flaws along the way, which would be difficult to erase all at the end. Parallel prototyping is again quite simple, keeping in mind that we get rid of the ownership bias that we mentioned earlier and work towards improving the product. A really good tip is to design not one, but two or even more options for each design component. This way, you can compare the options side by side and really be quite objective about the process. Speaking from experience, you will often end up taking the best from each option while deleting redundant features from each. And as a result, end up making an improved hybrid of sorts, which is better than all its parts. Now, phase 4 might seem simple at first glance, but some really important stuff goes on here. Heuristic evaluation and semantic differentials are the key methods that you should know about for iterative testing and working on feedback. Heuristic evaluation is something you probably know already. You might have heard of the Nielsen-Mollick principles for interaction design, a set of 10 design principles that you use to make sure that your designs strike the right balance of usability and desirability. Then there's also the 8 golden rules for interaction design by Ben Schneiderman, similar in nature to the Nielsen-Mollick heuristics, but they have quite a diverse range of use cases for themselves. Using these heuristics and rules of thumb, you should be able to generate a report about what works, what does not work, and why it did not work. Then you can again iterate and keep making your product better through a constant flow of recommendations following these heuristics. Now, semantic differentials might sound new to you, but they are quite basic and common. You just don't know that they are called semantic differentials. This tool is used to get information from the sentiments of the users and help make design decisions to improve them. So what you need to do here is to take one particular feature of your product that acts as a stimulus. For this feature, you now use an adjective to define it. And that is done by using one out of 2 bipolar words, like, for instance, valuable and worthless, or, excitable and calm. You then use a scale, a grading scale, say a 5-point or a 7-point scale, with each word of the pair of bipolar words at either end. So you have excitable at one end, calm at the other end, and 5 grading scales in between. This way, you can not only get a measurement of people's attitudes towards aspects of your product, but you will also find subtle differences between, connotative meanings that would otherwise have really been pretty obvious to you since, again, because of the ownership bias. And last but not the least, for phase 5, we have value opportunity analysis. And again, the love letter, breakup letter. As you might remember, phase 5 is all about making sure that your product is market ready. And for that effect, we need value opportunity analysis. This is somewhat similar to semantic differentials. But here you have predefined scales of low, medium, and high for various aspects of your product, 23 to be exact. These 23 characteristics are then grouped in 7 main categories: emotion, aesthetics, identity, impact, ergonomics, core technology, and quality. The users give their scores for each of these 23 characteristics. And your task is then to work on those characteristics that your users seem to be sure about them not being up to the mark. One really very important thing to keep in mind here is that you need to be performing this analysis multiple times over the course of your product's life out in the market. And definitely for each incremental design update that you push out to your product, let's say through the App Store or Play Store, or if it's a hardware redesign. And finally, we are at the last method, the love letter, breakup letter. It's a really interesting and quite important tool. It draws inspiration, you guessed it right, heavily from the role that human emotions play in a relationship. Now, it might seem outdated today to be writing a love letter, but then it is one of the purest of ways to get your feelings out. So to use this tool, you need to bring in your stakeholders and your client and ask them to write a love letter to the product in about 15 minutes or so. Now, excuse me if I get a little dramatic here, but so you need to ask your users, your client and your stakeholders to write the love letter detailing every single thing about the product that is so good and that keeps them awake in bed at night and gives them butterflies in the stomach. And once they have all submitted their love letters, you then proceed to the breakup letter. In this case, you tell them to write about every single thing that is so agonizing, they want to blow their own heads off. And again, at the end of 15 minutes, you have a collection of breakup letters. After thoroughly studying these letters, your job is to make a report about the values of product and the expectations that people have from it. This way, you can really understand the inner workings of the human mind. And that is the ultimate tool to help make your products infinitely better. But even after knowing all these methods, it is not about expertise in any single type of design tool. Neither is it about software or the final deliverables of your project. These are all just a means to design better and to make better design. Until and unless you dive into the real world with real stakeholders and the real DMU, decision-making unit, I can guarantee you won't be having as much fun. And the topic of fun brings me to a story that is really not much fun, actually. It is basically a case study of a project I was a part of. But I prefer the term story because, you know, everyone loves a good old story. So let me set up the context of this story. By the way, the events of this story took place last year in 2019. So we were approached by a client to make an app that digitizes kitty parties. You know, where friends and family members get together and pool in money, they play games and draw lots, and the winner gets it all. So the requirements of the client were laid down and finalized, or so we thought. It turns out even every now and then, we get a text from the client in our messaging group, graciously letting us know that we forgot X number of features, and hence they have been tricked into paying us more. Well, all negativity aside, suffice it to say that the work had been done and all features really fully functional. Users were coming in, going out, and the rating on the Play Store and the App Store was pretty decent. So we must have done something right. True, the aesthetics were pretty sleek and there was the premium look that the client was looking for. But at this point, you might be thinking that it was a success then. But you heard me introduce you to this story as if it was not much fun. Well, here's where the fun part begins. You see, the home screen of the app was something quite out of the box. For one thing, it strayed very far away from conventional home screen layouts. To us, it was quite different, even going so far as to say it was unique. But a quick chat with some domain experts, and we found out it was unique, all right, but in a very, very bad way. As it turns out, in the words of one expert, and I quote here, "This is the single most nasty layout I have ever seen." Yeah. So after these many interviews, I had primarily two thoughts in my head. The first, that of course I need to find out why we made those errors and where we went wrong, and then try to rectify it. The second thought was that I am really very thankful that the users do not know that it was I who designed the app, according to the client's forceful direction, of course, but ideally, that should not prevent anyone from taking the correct decision. Now, what we did wrong was, as I said, stray very far away from the established design guidelines and rules. We did not do any heuristic evaluation. As a result, the home screen was full of extreme usability issues. The global navigation from the home screen was represented by icons, most of which are pretty unconventional, except for the cart icon symbolizing the e-commerce store. Also, the labels for these icons would appear if and only if you long pressed on the icon for more than a second. Now, very rarely would a user stumble across this functionality by chance. So it was evident it was a huge mislead, or rather, no lead at all. The rest of the screens were pretty usable and looked quite good, frankly. But how would users reach those screens if they could not figure out how to use them in the first place? Now, the most important thing to remember about homepage design is that there are a few questions that any user should be able to answer if they are dropped off on any homepage of any website, any landing page. First of all, they should be able to understand what page they are on through something like a "you are here" indicator, like the ones you see in big museums or the zoo. Then the user should be able to understand the sections of the homepage, the main area, the menu, the title and subtitles, and all the other components. They should understand the global and local navigation options right from the homepage itself. And as you can understand by now, almost none of these questions could be answered by the homepage that we had designed. Another bonus tip: there are some users who are search dominant, which means that irrespective of which page they land on, they immediately start looking for a way to search for what they want. They prefer not to look around too much. In these cases, a search bar or even a prominent search button would do the trick. So, the moral of this story is that it is not in any way a bad thing, to follow rules, or in this case, homepage layout conventions that really have been battle tested, so to speak. And this ties in with the overarching principle that you should always try to get things right from the start. But how? Well, there is a good way to properly ideate for solutions to design problems. It is a circle chart that provides 4 basic steps for ideating and inventing options for solutions. Now, before we get into that chart, there are 2 important things to keep in mind. The first is that there is a huge difference between what can be made in theory to what we can actually achieve making in the real world. The second thing to note is that only when you identify what is wrong will you be able to move forward and ideate for what can be done to rectify it. So, the circle chart. It is divided into 4 quadrants, and it basically represents an endless, infinite loop. First, you need to identify the problem. That is, realize what is wrong in the real world. Then, you evaluate your findings. You analyze and diagnose the problem by seeing what is wrong in theory. Next, you need to understand what can be done in theory by generating broad ideas and approaches to reach the solution. And in the last step of the process, all that remains to be done is to point out the action ideas and specific steps that you need to take. what you might be doing in the real world to rectify that problem. All in all, these steps can be broadly defined as think, make, break, and repeat. Only then will you be actually adopting a design-centric approach for developing and building your product. And that brings us to the end of what I had to share with you today. So there are three main things that you might say are takeaways from this webinar. The first takeaway is that you shouldn't just design for the user. Design keeping the entire DMU in mind. Secondly, understand the different phases for designing a product or a service and use appropriate tools and establish design methods for best results. And last but not the least, design is not art. Design is strategy. And there are three responses to any design: yes, no, and wow. The target is to reach wow for all design elements around us. You know, from street signs to movie release posters, from restaurant menus to the control panel of a spaceship. You get my point. And so if you're interested, these are the resources that should really get you moving down the best path in this domain. Universal Methods of Design, Don't Make Me Think, and Rocket Surgery Made Easy. I would say that even if you're not a designer, these books would give you a broad overview of what makes good design, which is the main point of this presentation. Again, all I would urge you to do is to make designs that make everyone go wow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rounak. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm actually really glad that you mentioned at the end there about design with spaceships and advertising, because I wanted to ask you, before you get into any other questions, I wanted to ask you, for designers designing for the mobile space, what for you are the main other areas for inspiration? Where can people get inspiration for their design-centric development?
One thing I can assure you that you won't get any inspiration from is Pinterest, or it sounds cheesy, but Dribble or Behance. Because as you might see, those designs are really fantastic, and even I would really have a tough time trying to replicate those designs with cool gradients and amazing typography. But it is important to note that designing for mobile has its own challenges, and the most significant being that you are constrained to a really small layout, and you really need to prioritize what you put on that screen and what the local and global navigation options are. Because what needs to be reached earlier, say quick links and useful links that you see on government websites, are the local navigations, and sections of the website like About Us and Careers are the global navigation. So ideally, the local navigation plays a more important role. Like for instance, if you take the Twitter app, you would see a nav bar at the bottom, which is the local navigation. And it is prioritized over the global navigation, which you could reach by tapping on your name and your profile photo. And that helps you get into the profile settings and all the other things that are part of the global navigation for the app. So all in all, the end result depends on how you prioritize things and how you effectively make the center stage prominent for actually what it is, the message you're trying to get across. And each design exists because it tries to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So first you need to identify your problem. You should not go right off the bat into discussing and debating with your teammates over what should be on the home screen. Because until and unless you know what the real problem is, you won't know what the solution is. And the solution is what really will help you understand what you should put on that tiny 5-inch, 6-inch, even 7-inch screen, but it is tiny. and you really need to prioritize, as I said. That should really help you. And as I said, don't take any inspiration from Behance or Dribble apart from color inspiration, color palettes, you might say.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So it sounds to me like trying to get that balance between art and science. There's a bit more of a balance towards the science than the art, isn't there?
Exactly. Because it is, again, design is all about strategy. And the colorful part, the gradients, all those fancy animations you see, those aren't really solving problems. And so that is what you might expect at an art gallery, at a museum. You look at it and you are amused. You feel good, but is it actually solving any problem? I don't think so.
Okay. So maybe we can think of the title of your presentation as well as Design for Problem Solving.
Definitely, because design is to solve problems.
Perfect. Look, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your webinar. It was excellent. I would just like to thank once again our sponsor for today's webinar. This webinar was powered by Bluetooth. Thank you very much. Rounak, it's going to be back to you for questions and answers. Let me check if we've got some Q&A in the Slido tool. And I think I can pass back to you to respond to any of the questions that are there.
One thing that I would really want to clarify here is that there are two important aspects. Like, you have heard me advocating about design not being art, and you might think that I am like an art police sort of person, but actually there are two really important aspects that I mentioned: usability and desirability. Desirability is the art part of things. Usability is the problem-solving aspect. And it is really important that they really go hand in hand. I wouldn't say you prioritize usability over desirability or vice versa. But until and unless the design is aimed at solving a specific problem, it won't be effective no matter how desirable and how good looking it is.
Sure. So are you saying there's no place for just pretty things?
There is a place for pretty things, and the place would be a museum or an art gallery.
Okay.
Because those smoothing animations and those calming color gradients shifting from abstract shapes into one another, molding, if they exist in an app, like you might say there is a meditation app on the App Store called Calm, that advertises LeBron James as its sponsor. And I would say that they use those smooth animations and scrolls and gradients of one shape moving into one another and morphing, because the aim of that app is to make sure that you get into a semi-lucid dreaming sort of state. And those designs are really helpful in that aspect.
Sure.
So it is not unintentional that they have put those colors and those gradients there. It is perfectly rational, and it fits that purpose, and it's solving their problem, which is to make sure that people have a good meditating experience.
Sure. I understand what you're saying. You're saying that the choices have to be linked to a purpose to do with the business outcomes of the development. Do you have any advice for managing that internally? Because what you're saying is quite a strong message, that all design decisions have to be linked to a business outcome effectively.
Yes.
What would be your advice on how to make that happen within the team?
Okay. One really important thing is that even if it's design and it is revolving around art in some ways, adopting a scientific approach, how scientists use controls to make sure that the experiments they are doing really are going on the right path, and they are taking into account every little feature that might change the result and the observations. Likewise, in these design activities and the design sprints that teams like Google sprints undertake, it is important to adopt a scientific approach, because if you are not using a laid out, principled path, you will reach, of course, your design solutions, but they might be sidetracked. They might not exactly be the best and the absolutely perfect solution that you could have reached. And for these two reasons, those design methods that I mentioned, stage-wise, if you follow them, I'm sure, because I have, and I have seen people who succeeded largely because they followed those principles. And again, there's that entire book, Universal Principles of Design and Universal Methods of Design, dedicated to making teams better at solving these design problems and adopting a design thinking approach for development and building the product, and like taking it through the entire life cycle of the product or the service that you're making. And that actually helps make very successful products.
Brilliant. I think that's a brilliant place to close, Rounak. Again, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, you're welcome. You've been very generous with your thoughts and your ideas and how you've shared them. So thank you very much. Hopefully we'll see you for another webinar in the future.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. That's a wrap for today. Thank you to everyone that participated. And we'll see you for our next webinar, which is next Tuesday, all on the subject of Kotlin.